Catholic in Australia and among the Pope's most trusted advisors, has been found guilty of 5 counts of child sex abuse. It's been the biggest story in our country for months, but we couldn't tell you anything about it until now. This was the headline which ran before Christmas, December the 11th last year, the big story we could not report. That story was the Cardinal's conviction, but it was ordered we could not reveal any of the details. The Cardinal arrived at court this morning where that order was lifted. His crimes are heinous in nature and the details are sickening, but despite the verdict, they are crimes still being denied by Cardinal Pell. Let's begin our coverage with Mike Amor, who joins us now from court in Melbourne. Good afternoon to you, Mike. You were there when this news broke this morning and when the Cardinal was led out of court. Firstly, what has he been convicted of? Run us through the details of the charges.
As you mentioned, Ryan, they are most heinous in their nature, these charges. One is raping a 13-year-old boy. The other is 4 counts of sexually assaulting another 13-year-old boy. They date back to an incident that happened at the end of 1996. These 2 13-year-old boys were choir members who were performing at St Patrick's Cathedral and snuck off into a back room where they shouldn't have been, and they were discovered by George Pell, where that sexual assault and rape took place. It took a number of decades for those 2 boys, now men, to come forward. In fact, one of those boys died of a drug overdose back in 2014. So a very, very sad story indeed.
So, Mike, we couldn't report this until now because of a suppression order which was lifted this morning. So why was that?
Well, they put a suppression order in when George Pell was convicted of these crimes back on December 11 last year, because there was due to be a second trial involving another set of allegations dating back to the 1970s, where George Pell was accused of sexually assaulting boys at the Ballarat pool. A court said that some of the key evidence would not be permitted in that trial, so the prosecution today dropped that trial and therefore were able to also drop the suppression order. It was quite a ludicrous situation, Ryan, because this was heavily reported outside of Australia, where this suppression order didn't have any effect, and a lot of that coverage was still available here in Australia, but we, the Australian media, were under the threat of going to jail if we reported of it. Now we can, and we can tell you that George Pell has been convicted of sexual assault and also rape.
So, Mike, what happens now? What's the legal process?
Well, George Pell will be back here at the Melbourne County Court tomorrow for a plea hearing. We expect that he will go into custody and will not be released. He has been on bail since he was found guilty back in December. We also believe that he will be sentenced later next week, and he has also lodged an appeal. How quickly that process will take and whether or not he will receive bail, we just don't know. But certainly tonight will be George Pell's last night of freedom for a while yet. Right.
Okay, Mike, thanks for that update. We'll cross back to you later in the Daily Edition. Now, the news of Pell's conviction has been met with outrage. Tensions flared at County Court in Melbourne after the Cardinal left the hearing this morning. Let's take a listen.
He can rot in hell if he believes what he preaches, right? And he preaches that there's heaven and hell. Well, he's going to burn in hell, you know. He's a freak, he's a pedophile. He has destroyed the Victorian community. The Catholics in Victoria, we demand that he be excommunicated from the church. George Pell is a monster, a freak. He has to be jailed. No home detention, none of this pathetic, weak justice. We want to see him in jail. We want to see him fry in hell forever.
The outrage is already deafening. Now all eyes are on the Catholic Church following the verdict. Let's go to 7 News Europe Bureau Chief Hugh Whitfield, who has more from the Vatican.
The news of George Pell's conviction only adds to the level of crisis within the Catholic Church that just over the weekend reached some sort of a crescendo when the Pope himself hosted a 4-day summit on the issue of child sexual abuse at the hands of priests, an issue that is described by archbishops as a global emergency. Now, other reporters from around the world have been able to speak about Cardinal Pell's conviction in spite of the suppression order in place in Victoria for a number of months now. They have told us that there is shock and a level of denial within the Vatican at this news, and it will have a huge impact. Cardinal Pell was the third most powerful Catholic in the world amongst a congregation of 1.2 billion people on every civilized continent on the face of the earth. Now, he was handpicked by Pope Francis to travel here to Rome, to move here to Rome in February 2014 to clean up the Vatican's finances. He was seen as somewhat of a head kicker, by some as a bully. He made a lot of enemies as he cleaned up the Vatican's finances, reforming the bank and the books. But it all started to fall apart for Cardinal Pell when he refused to travel back to Australia to answer questions at the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse. Instead, the Royal Commission came here to Rome, and onlookers and Vatican watchers say he essentially brought the issues and crises that the Church in Australia was facing here to the doorstep of the Pope.